sea, before fire fell from heaven, before a nation was born out of slavery, there was a man hiding in the desert, hoping no one would ever say his name again. And here's the question that should unsettle you right away. What if the reason God hasn't spoken yet is because you've been running so well? Because the voice you're waiting for often comes only after silence has done its work. Picture this: a sun that burns without mercy, a wilderness so quiet you can hear your own thoughts accusing you, a man walking behind sheep that don't even belong to him anymore. This man was once raised in a palace, once called son, once educated among princes. Now he smells like dust, sweat, and regret. His name is Moses, and the world remembers him as a hero. But today, he doesn't feel heroic. He feels forgotten. 40 years earlier, Moses believed he was chosen. He knew it. He felt the injustice in his bones. He saw his people beaten, crushed, humiliated, and something snapped. One moment of rage, one impulsive strike, one body lying still in the sand. And just like that, destiny collapsed. Listen, this part matters. Moses didn't just run from Pharaoh. He ran from himself. He ran from the question that haunted him at night. What if I was never called? What if I just imagined it? So he disappears into Midian. No spotlight, no calling, no miracles, just sheep, day after day, year after year. And here's a shocking truth most people miss. The Bible gives more space to Moses' waiting than his miracles, because God often does his deepest work when it looks like nothing is happening at all. 40 years pass, not days, not months, decades. Moses grows old. His dreams shrink. His confidence erodes. His voice softens. He stops expecting God to interrupt. And that's exactly when heaven moves. One ordinary day, not a holy day, not a fast, not a prayer meeting, Moses notices something wrong. A bush, on fire, but not burning up. Don't rush past this. Fire in the desert wasn't unusual. Lightning strikes happened. Brush fires came and went. But this fire refused to consume. And Moses does something small that changes everything. He turns aside. Here's the thing, and I'm serious. Most people miss God not because he's silent, but because they won't stop scrolling long enough to look twice. Moses steps closer. The fire crackles. The air feels heavier. Time itself seems to slow. And then, a voice. Not thunder. Not shouting. A voice that knows his name. Moses, Moses. And suddenly the man who hasn't heard his name spoken with meaning in 40 years freezes. Because when God calls your name, he's not asking where you are. He's revealing that he knows exactly where you've been. Do not come any closer, the voice says. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Holy, not because of the location, but because of the presence. Listen carefully. God didn't wait for Moses to clean himself up. He didn't demand confidence. He didn't require youth. He met him in exile, and then comes the revelation. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Moses hides his face because suddenly he understands this isn't nostalgia speaking. This is continuity. God hasn't forgotten the promise. And here's where the story becomes uncomfortable. God says he has seen the suffering of his people. He has heard their cries. He knows their pain. And Moses might be thinking, yes, finally, you're going to do something. And then God says the words that change everything. So now, I am sending you. Silence. Real silence. The kind where your heart starts pounding before your mouth opens. Moses stammers. Who am I that I should go? And this is important. Moses doesn't argue theology. He argues worth. Because the greatest barrier to obedience is not fear of failure. It's the belief that we're disqualified. God doesn't reassure Moses by praising him. He says something far more unsettling. I will be with you. That's it. No detailed plan. No guarantees. No step-by-step breakdown. Just presence. And Moses panics. He lists his weaknesses, his past, his inability to speak clearly. And here's the shocking part. God already knows all of that, which means Moses' flaws were never an obstacle. They were the strategy. Listen, God didn't choose Moses despite his brokenness. He chose him because of it. Because a confident man might claim credit, but a broken one will tell the truth. Moses asks God his name, and the answer is not what he expects. I am who I am, not I was, not I will be I am. Meaning, I don't depend on time. I don't depend on approval. I don't depend on strength. And neither will you. The fire still burns. The bush still stands. And here's a detail that should shake you. After God finishes speaking, the bush doesn't move. The miracle wasn't meant to travel with Moses. The calling was, because miracles get your attention, but obedience carries the story forward. Moses leaves that place changed, but not confident. He goes back to Egypt trembling, questioning, resistant. And yet, step by step, the sea will part, chains will break, a nation will walk free. But it all started with one man who almost ignored a burning bush. So here's the truth that hits hard at the end. The fire you're waiting for may already be burning quietly beside your routine. The question isn't whether God still calls. The question is whether you're willing to turn aside, because God still uses the unlikely, the tired, the doubtful, the ones who think their moment has passed. And listen, if God can speak through a bush that should have been ashes, he can speak through your life too. Now pause with me for a moment. If this story stirred something in you, if you felt that quiet pull in your spirit, don't ignore it. This is why Parables of Hope exists, to remind you that God still speaks, that purpose still burns, that no season is wasted. If this message blessed you, Please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to Parables of Hope so we can keep bringing these stories to life. Your support matters more than you know. Every comment, every share, every subscription tells us to keep going. And when you're done here, explore our previous videos on Parables of Hope, stories meant to strengthen faith, restore courage, and bring hearts closer to God. Share this message. Spread the truth. Let hope travel further than fear, because somewhere right now, someone is standing near a fire they don't yet recognize. And maybe, just maybe, this was the moment God planned for them to turn aside. Stay blessed, stay listening, and never underestimate what God can do through the unlikely. Let the silence breathe for a second, because the parable doesn't end at the fire. The fire was only the beginning. Imagine the bush again, still burning, still ordinary in shape, still rooted in dry, lifeless ground. Now imagine God pausing, not because he ran out of words, but because he wanted Moses to understand something deeper. And here's the parable hidden inside the moment. God could have chosen a cedar, tall, impressive, majestic, something everyone would notice from far away. But he chose a bush, low, ignored, easily crushed underfoot, because the message was never about the fire. It was about what can carry the fire without being destroyed. Listen, this matters more than it sounds. Fire consumes most things. It destroys what isn't prepared to hold it. But this bush, it burns and yet remains. And that is the parable of every soul God calls, not the strongest, not the loudest, not the most polished, but the ones who have already been stripped down by life, the ones who have nothing left to protect. Moses had already burned once. His anger burned. His confidence burned. His dreams burned. And what was left was humility. That's why the fire didn't destroy him. Here's the thing. God doesn't ignite what still trusts itself to survive. He ignites what knows it cannot. And now the story widens, because Moses wasn't the only one watching the fire. Israel was watching too, from a distance, in chains, under whips, inside the prayers that felt unanswered. They didn't see the bush, but they would soon feel the fire. And this is where the parable turns uncomfortable, because before freedom comes confrontation, before deliverance comes resistance, before God breaks chains, he exposes hearts. Moses goes to Pharaoh with nothing but a word, no army, no influence, no backup plan, just a voice that once trembled in the desert. And Pharaoh laughs, because power always laughs when it thinks God is bluffing. But here's the terrifying truth. The same fire that comforts the called terrifies the proud. The plagues fall. The signs increase. The tension rises. And yet Pharaoh's heart hardens. Why? Because fire reveals what already exists inside. The same sun that melts wax hardens clay. And that's the parable the world keeps missing. God's presence doesn't change people. It reveals them. Some kneel. Some resist. Some repent. Some rebel. The fire never forces obedience. It only invites surrender. Now lean in, because this part reaches us. Israel eventually walks out of Egypt, but Egypt does not walk out of Israel. They are free in body, but still bound in mind. And suddenly the fire appears again, this time not in a bush, but in a pillar. Fire by night, cloud by day. Guidance, protection, reminder. The same God, the same presence, different season. Here's the parable hidden in that shift. God will change how he leads you, without ever changing who he is. If he only spoke through burning bushes, you'd spend your life chasing moments. Instead, he becomes constant. And yet, even with fire in the sky, the people complain, because miracles can lead you out of slavery, but only trust can lead you into promise. The fire splits the sea. The fire rests on the mountain. The fire writes the law. And slowly the pattern becomes clear. God draws near. People panic. God provides. People forget him, until one day what you do? Fire falls again. But this time it does consume. Nadab and Abihu step into God's presence casually, unprepared, unreverent. And the fire that once guided now judges, because the parable has two edges. God is near, but he is not common. Holy ground never becomes ordinary, just because you walk on it often. And now, the story whispers forward through time. Prophets speak of fire refining silver, of hearts purified, of lips cleansed by burning coal, until centuries later, another unlikely gathering appears, not in a desert, not on a mountain, but in an upper room. Ordinary people, fearful people, unqualified people, and suddenly, fire again. Not on a bush, not in the sky, but on them. Tongues of fire, resting, not destroying. The parable completes itself. God no longer burns outside humanity. He burns within. And here's the shocking truth at the end of it all. You were always meant to be the bush. Not impressive, not invincible, but available, carrying holy fire, without being consumed. So when you feel that stirring, that quiet heat in your chest, that unrest that won't let you stay comfortable, don't call it coincidence. That's not pressure. That's invitation. Because God still calls the unlikely. He still ignites the forgotten. He still chooses what the world walks past. And the final parable is this. The bush didn't chase the fire. The fire came looking for it. So maybe your job isn't to become more impressive. Maybe it's simply to stay rooted and let God do the burning. And if this story spoke to you, if it lit something small but real inside your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video. Share it with someone who feels unqualified. Subscribe to Parables of Hope so we can keep telling stories that awaken faith. Watch our previous videos. Walk this journey with us. Because hope spreads best when it's carried by ordinary people, brave enough to burn, and yet remain. And remember, the fire hasn't gone out. It's just waiting for someone willing to turn aside. All right, Now let's bring the fire out of the desert and place it right where we live today. Because if the burning bush only mattered thousands of years ago, it would be history. But if it still speaks now, then it's prophecy. Listen carefully. Today's world is loud. Notifications burn. News cycles rage. Opinions flare up and disappear overnight. Everything is on fire. Yet almost nothing is holy. And that's the problem. We live in a time where everything burns fast and nothing lasts. Careers burn people out. Dreams burn bright and die young. Social media sets lives on fire, then leaves them as ashes. And right in the middle of this noise, God still chooses to speak the same way he always has. Quietly, unexpectedly, through what everyone else ignores. In Moses' time, it was a bush. Today, it might be a moment you almost scrolled past, a conversation you didn't plan, a failure that humbled you, a delay that ruined your timeline, a restlessness you can't explain. Here's the uncomfortable truth of our generation. We're surrounded by flames, but we've lost the ability to recognize fire that doesn't destroy. We chase what looks powerful. God looks for what can endure. Think about it. In today's world, we celebrate visibility. God still values availability. We reward confidence. God still works through surrender. We amplify the loudest voices. God still whispers to the listening heart. And just like Moses, many people today are not rebellious. They're just tired. Tired of trying. Tired of hoping. Tired of believing they still matter. So they settle. They take jobs beneath their calling. They shrink dreams to survive disappointment. They convince themselves that this is just life now. And that's exactly where God shows up. Not at the peak, not in the palace, but in the routine. Because the modern burning bush often appears disguised as ordinary life. Here's the thing, and I mean this. God rarely interrupts success. He interrupts comforted resignation. Moses wasn't doing wrong things. He was just doing small things forever. And today that looks like people living safely, faith kept private, purpose postponed until someday. But God still calls, not always to leave your country, sometimes to leave your fear, not always to confront a Pharaoh, sometimes to confront your own excuses, not always to lead millions, sometimes to influence one soul faithfully. And just like Moses, the first reaction today is the same. Who am I? Who am I in a world of influencers? Who am I when others seem more qualified? Who am I with this past, this weakness, this hesitation? And God's answer hasn't changed. I will be with you. Not you are enough. Not you are perfect. But you will not be alone. That promise hits differently in today's world. A world more connected than ever. And more lonely than ever. And here's the modern shock, Isiya. Many people today don't reject God. They reject the version of God that demands nothing. They want inspiration, not transformation. Comfort, not calling. Blessing, not burning. But the burning bush reminds us, God's fire is not for entertainment. It's for commissioning. If God were to call today the way he called Moses, it wouldn't trend. It wouldn't go viral. It would feel disruptive because holy encounters always interrupt normal life. And here's the final connection that should sit heavy in your heart. The bush did not move. Moses did. God still anchors himself in truth. We are the ones invited to step forward. In today's world, the question isn't, is God still speaking? The question is, can we still recognize his voice when it doesn't come with noise, hype, or applause? Because maybe the fire isn't missing. Maybe we've just learned to walk past it too quickly. So if you feel that quiet burning, that pull towards something deeper, that nudge to forgive, to speak, to serve, and to return, don't dismiss it as stress or coincidence. That's not pressure. That's purpose knocking. And in a world that burns everything it touches, God is still looking for people who can carry his fire without being consumed. Maybe that person is you. So before this story ends, before the music fades, before you move on to the next thing, stay with me just a little longer. Because maybe the burning bush was never about Moses. Maybe it was about you sitting here right now listening. Think about your life for a moment. The prayers you whispered and thought God didn't hear. The doors that closed and left you confused. The season where nothing made sense and you felt invisible. What if that wasn't punishment? What if that was preparation? What if the silence you're in is the same silence Moses walked through right before God spoke his name? Listen, God didn't call Moses when he was confident. He called him when he was tired. God didn't speak when Moses felt ready. He spoke when Moses felt finished. And maybe that's where you are right now. Still breathing, still hoping, quietly, still standing, even when you don't know why. And here's the truth that brings tears to many hearts. God doesn't measure your life by speed, success, or applause. He measures it by willingness. You don't need to be louder. You don't need to be stronger. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to turn aside when something holy interrupts your ordinary day. Because the fire never went out. It's been waiting patiently for you to notice. So if something inside you feels warm right now, if your heart feels heavy and hopeful at the same time, if this story feels personal, that's not emotion alone. That's God reminding you that your story isn't over. And if this message touched you, if it helped you feel closer to God, please support this mission. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs hope. Subscribe to Parables of Hope so we can keep creating stories that heal, awaken, and inspire faith. Your support truly matters. Every like, every comment, every subscription encourages us to keep going. And don't stop here. Watch our previous videos on Parables of Hope, stories meant to lift the weary, restore the broken, and remind the world that God still calls the unlikely. Share this message. Spread the truth. Let hope travel further than fear, because somewhere, right now, someone is standing in their own wilderness, wondering if God still speaks. And maybe, through you, they'll hear the answer. Stay blessed, stay listening, and never forget, the fire still burns.